Volunteer Day. Our virtual Volunteer Day 2020, we have a video for you now.
Hello, Bruins. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 12th annual UCLA Volunteer Day. Of course, things are a little different this year. We aren't piling onto buses and fanning out across the city, but I'm so glad we're still coming together in the spirit of public service. The UCLA Volunteer Center, Community Service Commission, Student Affairs, and many other campus partners spent months reimagining this cherished event for our current times. I'm grateful to them, to the Westcom Foundation, and to our community partners for making this virtual day of service and learning happen. And I thank each of you for spending your Saturday with your fellow Bruins. Service is one of our true Bruin values, and it's core to UCLA as a public institution dedicated to the common good. We aim to instill a commitment to service early on through this event, which is a cornerstone experience for our incoming students. Over the years, Volunteer Day has grown to include any and all Bruins from around the world who want to join us in giving back to their communities. This kind of commitment is needed now more than ever, as so many people are struggling with the effects of the pandemic and meeting basic needs. I hope the experiences you have today will be enjoyable and will inspire you to continue volunteering and making a difference into the future. Thank you again and enjoy your session.
All right, thank you guys so much. So now we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. So again, my name is Amanda Finzi Smith. I'll be your moderator today. I am a resident director and help to advise the Black Community Center located in Reber Hall on the Hill. So let's start with Bri. You're muted, Bri.
Thank you. My name is Bri Giger. I'm very happy to be here. I've worked as an activist with Black Lives Matter and many different organizations for the past 10 years, and this is great.
Thank you. D'Artagnan?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am proud to be here with all of you. I am a double Bruin, did my undergrad and grad there at UCLA, and currently serve as the executive director and founder of the Social Justice Learning Institute, which is an organization that is headquartered here in Los Angeles, serving youth throughout our communities. I'm also the president of the Inglewood Unified School District Board of Education and the president of the UCLA Alumni Association. So I'm proud to be here with all of you today and look forward to this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much. Trisden?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Trisden Shaw. I am a recent graduate of UCLA, the former president of the Black Graduate Student Association. I received my master's in African American Studies at UCLA. And now I am currently working with and for Dr. Scorza at the Social Justice Learning Institute as a program and curriculum coach. They're working through the LA Unified School District, working with some Black and brown men, helping them get to college and learn some like ethnic studies course work. So I'm just happy to be here and organized on campus and doing a bunch of different things, working with you, Amanda, to get the Black Resource Center on campus. It's been a pleasure. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Trisden. And our last panelist for the day is David. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is David Cunningham. I am a law student. I'm a UCLA student. I am a member and organizer with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. I have been a member for several years now. And I'm also running for Los Angeles City Council for the 2022 election. I believe that it's, it's time for change. We're not receiving the justice that we deserve as a community. And that's why I'm running And I've been an organizer and, an activist for, since I was, 15 and younger. So.
Thank you so much, David. So for all of our attendees here, what will happen is I'll go through some questions we have, and then after that, we'll have time for questions from the audience. So anytime throughout this, if you have some questions, please just add them to the chat. And once that time comes, I'll read them for our panelists. If they're for one specific person, if you could put the person's name, that'd be helpful. If it's for anyone, put that too. All right, so let's get started. David, well, actually, this is for everyone. What has Black Lives Matter meant to you? And we're gonna keep this to like a minute and a half. So anyone who wants to start.
I guess I'll start since you called on me first. Black Lives Matter to me legitimizes my standing, liberty, and freedom in this country. For far too long, Black bodies have been taken advantage of, disrespected, dismissed, and discounted. BLM lends a voice to those of us who have been seen as voiceless for 400 plus years. And Black Lives Matter has provided a path for our voices to be heard. And so that's how I look at Black Lives Matter and the movement.
Thank you. Next.
I can go next. So Black Lives Matter to me is a movement. It's history. I think that growing up, we thought that the fight for Black rights and equal justice was just something for history, and it's something that we've accomplished already. We saw Obama being elected when I was in middle school, and it was like, oh, this is a post-racial society. But Black Lives Matter to me helped show that that was kind of gaslighting. It showed that this is still a fight that we're in. Just like David said, it's giving us a voice that we didn't have before. And it's allowed as a nation for us to build consciousness around different issues that are going on, and allowing spaces just like this on college campuses and across the nation to not only talk about what is going on and the injustices that we are facing, but having critical thoughts and critical dialogue on how to actually change these things.
Thank you so much, Trisden. Bri or D'Artagnan? Bri looks like she's unmuting.
I got it. I did it. Those are some of the best answers I've heard, because it's just I feel the time that I really have to talk about this is to people that don't understand it. So it's good to hear that, and I loved all those answers very much, and taking notes on how to respond to that when and if I have to again, and I will have to again and again. Yeah, to me, it's life. It's everything, it's like dreaming and the idea of having children and kids someday, and working, so hard right now and being active so that they, I wish I could say don't have to, still answer this question over and over again. It's so bizarre to me having to explain this to people who have to incorporate all lives matter into Black Lives Matter, and I think we all have an analogy that we like to use. And my favorite is to think of your house is on fire, right? Your house is on fire. You call the firefighters come over, and they're not gonna ask about all the other houses that aren't on fire. This house is on fire, and it's grieving, and it's mourning, and it needs help right now. And we're not thinking about the houses, but when we are thinking about the other houses, they're still, they're still a part of us. We still love them very much, and we're still, a whole. So yeah, it blows my mind how many times we have to answer that. But to me, to simplify that answer, Black Lives Matter is it's everything. We need to figure it out now, literally right now, or it's a wrap.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. Thank you, Bri and Trisden and David, for sharing that. I would say that while Black Lives Matter emerged as a movement after the killing of Trayvon Martin, what it really reflects is an effort in our society to push back against racism, right? It's an anti-racist movement. It's an effort to not only affirm the humanity of Black people, of my son, of my daughter, of my wife, of my family, of my cousins, of my brothers, but it's here to say, look, it's not good enough to simply going about the status quo, right? To allow society to maintain these systems of oppression, to maintain white supremacy, to maintain these hierarchies that ultimately devalue the lives of Black people, but that we have to actively be anti-racist. We have to disrupt the ways in which our society perpetuates oppressive ideologies, institutions, and strategies against Black bodies, right? We have to stand for life. We have to stand for justice. And it's an active movement to bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice.
Y'all are just blowing me away with all of your responses, so I appreciate it. And I'm ready to get to these next questions. So now, David, with this movement, what kind of change do you hope to see regarding policing and the criminal justice system?
As we know, there are a couple of propositions, being proposed in California to, that boost criminal justice reform. One proposition that I've been going back and forth on was Prop 25, and that's the bail reform. And I've had a look at it, and I've had several looks at it. Initially, I supported it, and I still kind of support it because, giving, legislation in California politics, California is seen as this like super progressive state, but we have a lot of, Democrats who, continue to go against the people and what the people really need, and putting forth progressive legislation that actually benefit Black people. And so Prop 25, what that does is that it gets rid of the bail system, but it replaces it with an algorithm that can be considered racist, that can be considered to continue to oppress Black and brown people. And so I get the back and forth on it. However, I believe that, policies like that, with the idea of advancing, scratch that. In regards to policies and police reform, not even reform, abolish the police. Police unions, they run politics right here in LA and right here in LA County. Alone, they have donated over $500 million to local political campaigns across the city and across the county. This has created some kind of cause and effect where once you're elected and you've received money from the police unions, our elected officials tend to turn a blind eye to the abuse and misuse of power when it comes to the officers committing crimes against our communities. This is unacceptable and not a way law enforcement can be held accountable. So what I would like to see, and what our community would like to see, is for our elected officials and for our Black elected officials to stop receiving money from entities, our law enforcement entities that continue to harm us. And that's a way that our community, our elected officials, sell us out. Ending the quota system in the criminal justice departments for our justice system for departmental funding. That's a huge problem, whether it be the district attorney's office, whether it be LAPD, LA County Sheriff's Department. The more bodies that they bring in, the more money they receive. If the department doesn't meet its quota at the end of the fiscal year, they're not going to get the same funding that they received last year. So their job is to go out and criminalize Black and minority communities. So I want to see an end put to that, and put our legislators put forth policies that will make sure that our communities are not criminalized further.
Thank you for that. And actually, continue on that topic for the rest of the panel. Recently, we've been seeing a lot of discussion around this exact topic, right? The concept of defunding the police. I'd like to take some time for the three of you to answer, like, what is your perspective on this and what it truly entails? So, Bri, Trisden, or D'Artagnan, thoughts?
Yeah, I think David said it perfectly, but it just is you know, there's a difference between defunding and abolishing police. And as much as I'm out here protesting to defund it, I'm also some days I come home, I'm like, just abolish it, just go, you know? And but in the real world, once I come back to reality, defunding it is as simple as like, you know, when we're at protests, you see those helicopters in the sky sometimes. Those helicopters cost like $3,000 just to launch off the ground, just to get them off the ground, and that's not talking about the people inside them and all the people that are working in the, you know, in the control panel, just to watch us peacefully protest. And they watch us for hours. Sometimes there's three of us and three of them in these really nice helicopter cars. And my answer to that is for what? So just to like kind of put it in perspective, the way they're utilizing their money is absolutely ridiculous and uncalled for.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to it real quick before we move on to the next question? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I think abolition is a hard conversation to have with people, right? They think that without police, that we're just going to be in a system of anarchy. And I think that is not really accurate. I think that, so what I studied at UCLA was abolition democracy, and it was a theory by Angela Davis. The theory is that abolition is the ultimate goal. Abolition in the sense that we need to be able to reimagine a society without the need for police, without the need for prisons. That doesn't mean that we get rid of them tomorrow by any means. Defunding the police is a step in the right direction. So it's a two-step process. We need to take away money. So that is what the defunding the police is. But that money doesn't just disappear, it's reallocated. I think that that's the one step of the conversation that people aren't really talking about. Bri made a great point. Their money is being spent in so many different ways. The money is being on these helicopters. We know that police, they ride two to a car. I can drive up the street to Ralph's and see 3 different police cars. That's 6 officers. If they're making $80,000, we're getting close to $300,000, $400,000 in a car in a yearly salary. So the money that they have there's a gross amount. They have money for settlements. They shouldn't have money for settlements. I think that encourages them to know that if they happen to brutalize somebody, that the money isn't coming directly out of their salaries, it isn't coming directly out of some things, that they have money allocated away from that. So it's a conversation of reallocation. And where can we put this money? That money can go into education, that money can go into a bunch of different things that the people need that can actually help the community.
Yeah, thank you. Dartan, you had something quick?
Yeah, sure. And I think often when we're talking about defund, right, I think both Bri and Trisden have really provided a solid framework for this, but often it means to disband, disarm, decriminalize, and document in many ways the work that happens with police. And so if you think about what it takes to actually respond to the challenges we may be dealing with in our society, it doesn't always require sort of a force, right, or the use of force. It doesn't always require that a police officer shows up to respond to someone who may be facing a mental health issue. It doesn't require that police need to be on school campus to arrest a young person who might, may decide they don't want to listen to a teacher. They're engaging in willful defiance. What I think folk have really been talking about is how we reimagine and have a political vision that focuses on community care, well-being, and safety, and to think about how we redesign the role of police so that we focus on liberatory efforts in our communities, and then take those resources that have created harm in our communities and invest them in healing, make sure that communities have the supports they need to thrive, make sure there's no collusion so we're not incarcerating juveniles in our society, or we're not incarcerating people for using drugs. I had a father who was incarcerated for most of my life because he was addicted to drugs, right? When we think about the opioid crisis right now, the way the federal government is responding in the opioid crisis is exactly what we're talking about with defund police. They didn't launch the war on drugs, right? They didn't launch sort of an effort to incarcerate people en masse. They said, no, this is a public health crisis. Let's put these resources towards the health and the needs of people in our communities. That's what we're saying. We're saying respond to the issues with the resources, the resources that we have that have been allocated to police to respond in ways that are not actually helping to keep us safe. Let's take those resources out of these strategies and put them into others that are going to support people, that are going to repair justice and transform communities and redress the cumulative harms that have been happening in our spaces.
Yeah.
And so that's what defund means.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, since we're talking to you, D'Artagnan, outside of protesting on behalf of killing unarmed Black people, what other issues would you like to highlight as it relates to advocating for justice, racial equality? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So, there's a need to be actively anti-racist. And Ibrahim X. Kendi, right, talks about this. It's not good enough to just say, I'm not racist, right? Racism lives in our society. So I'm not going to argue whether or not it exists. I think hopefully many of us who are attending this panel really can see the evidence of it in our communities, on television, the dog whistles that happen in politics. I think what we're really trying to say, and what I at least would encourage us to think about, is how in our steps on a personal level, rather how we're personally taking steps to transform our communities, to talk to our neighbors, to talk to our aunts and our uncles and our parents, to make sure that we're advocating for justice when it's not convenient, right? To make sure that we're standing up to folk when they are, yelling at people in the grocery store because they don't, quote unquote, belong here in our communities or in our societies, right? That we have to actively work to take these things on, but more specifically, we got to think about how our humanity, right, needs to be honored, and how we do that across not only just racial and ethnic groups, but also across sexual orientation, right? And across the sort of the limitations that we put in place, because we have to honor the lives of Black trans people. We have to honor the lives of people who are not as able-bodied, right? We have to honor the lives of people who we look down upon in our society and lift them up and say they're deserving of their dignity and humanity as well.
Thank you so much. For you, Bri, in your experience and field of work, what have you found to be the most effective ways to speak on Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, I think overall, of course, we want to speak to Black Lives Matter and be part of the community with our Black friends and our Black brothers and sisters and all the beautiful Black people I've been meeting at these protests. And we want to have these meetings and talk about it, but with other Black people. But I think the most effective way is really speaking to the non-Black communities and going into white communities, which can be crazy sometimes, but being that voice and realizing that I have that voice to go in these white communities and explain to them and educate them why their kids should have Black friends, why why they should really know about us and research about us and understand us, other than what all they're seeing or what they what they believe. Yeah, it sounds pretty crazy, but I really think if speaking on Black Lives Matter, it should be to white communities and non-Black communities overall. Some other things for non-Black people when hearing us speak on Black Lives Matter could be just listen without being defensive. Some people think when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're calling them racist. It's not about that. If you think it's racist, then you might be racist. Use your privilege. White people, use your privilege. Use your privilege. I grew up in the queer community. I came out when I was 20, and I thought the LGBTQ community would be 100% on board a lot this year, and they have on and off, but it was just expected for me, for those same people I had marched with, to get equal rights, for them to be there with me when the many Black people were murdered this year, and it wasn't that easy. So just because they're LGBTQ doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, okay, they're all going to be out there. Like, go out and speak to those communities that you're seeing less representation in. Go out and protest, donate to the victims, of the families, advocate to mental health. We're we're healing and we're mourning, and we need as much help as possible. Record police officers when you see shit going down. If you're around, use that. And just help good police officers, if there are any, speak up. They say they're out there, but I haven't seen them.
Well, thank you, Bri. You guys are so amazing. So Trisden, what are some fundamental policy changes that you would like to see in our country when it comes to the treatment of Black people?
Thank you for the question, Amanda. And I want you to know that that is a huge question. I've thought about this time and time again as a political science major and a master's in African American studies. And I think that there are a lot of things that are interconnected, a lot of our systems. So the first thing I have to say is universal healthcare. I think that if you can provide healthcare to people, especially like young people, like I'm seeing my students each and every day, they're struggling with a bunch of different things, whether it be mental health, physical health, wellness. I think that that is something crucial to everyone in the nation. I think that the income inequality and the wealth gap is something huge. Trying to figure out how to kind of tailor that when we see that Trump is paying $750 $750 in taxes, right? In 2016. It's like, I didn't got my second check from SJLI and like, I'm getting close to that federally. So like, I think that that is something too that we really have to look at. In education itself, I think that we're seeing a privatization of education. I think that public schools, not everyone has an option to go to a private school or a charter school. A lot of us are going to public schools, and we've always seen public school as a tool for liberation, a tool for socially climbing. But I'm in these public schools, even though we're on Zoom, I see that a lot of these students don't have the resources that they need. Without our class, I think that these students would really be struggling. And I think that there is just so much that we have to kind of do policy-wise. But I also want to point out that policy isn't the end-all be-all. We have laws on the books. We have, so in California, so I just looked it up, we have AB 392, and that's the Stephon Clark law. That was supposed to be prioritizing like the mitigation of deadly force by police. There are people still being killed in LA specifically, but in California in general. There is, we saw the no-knock warrant law passed in, I think, Louisville for Breonna Taylor. What I'm trying to get at is that there is about the implementation of the law, right? I think we can have the laws on the books, but if there aren't the people, whether that be the police officers or the city officials that we need to prioritize and to execute the laws, how they're written on the books, I think that there's a gap. We think about like Brown versus Board of Education, that was pivotal, right, to the civil rights movement, stopping school segregation. But we know now that schools are as segregated as they've ever been. So I think that we can have, and that's the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest law of the land. That and the amendments, we got the 15th Amendment, we got the 13th Amendment, but we still know that there's voter suppression. So I think that we can have the laws on the books, but I think it's the implementation of it. So my push is that there is the democratization of these institutions, that the community that is involved with the oversight of the implementation of these laws, but also in the direct the decision making. We call it a democratic republic, but it's democratic in the sense that we can vote, but we don't get the republic sense of it. We don't get the polling of the people. So I think that there are a lot of things that we have to see. And I think that, yeah, like without the people's voice centered, I think that a lot of times, no matter how great of a bill we can get passed, how long it takes, I think that we slowly see it get chiseled down and chipped away. And there has to be some type of oversight. There has to be some type of accountability measures built into our systems to ensure that our policies, whatever they be, whether that be for healthcare, education, rights in general, that people are being protected and people are being prioritized.
Thank you so much. Yes. So for this next question, it is packed with a lot of questions, and I want to leave it open for any of you to answer any portion of the question, if that makes sense. So I want the panelists to talk about how you think we can all work together to be an ally for racial justice. What can those with power and the privilege do to enact positive change to further this cause? What can students do? What are the steps you can take to further advance racial justice and an anti-racist agenda? And again, you can answer any part of that question that spoke to your soul.
I guess I'll go. So first we have to establish what racial justice consists of. So that's the first step. Then we have to acknowledge that there are racial disparities that have been ignored yet engraved in the fiber of our nation. Then we have to acknowledge the many players in our uniquely American system that upholds white supremacy and also continues to oppress the Black community. We have to create sets of policies and legislation to dismantle systems like the quota system in our criminal justice system, systems like the school to prison pipeline, and putting an end to recidivism by way of creating programs to teach, engage, and enhance youth in our communities, amongst many other policies that will be beneficial to the Black community. We have to vote, we have to run for office and support Black candidates who have a Black agenda. Again, support Black candidates, not just any Black candidates, but Black candidates who have a Black agenda and will stay strong and solid on their Black agenda. We have to educate and encourage political involvement amongst our youth and amongst our seniors, and go out and teach how policies and legislation can have an impact on our lives by helping people register to vote and hosting many different events. That's how I believe that our allies can, play a role or as an ally for us.
That's a good outline to start with. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else want to answer?
Amanda, there was a part of the question that you said something about like people like using
their privilege. Yeah. What can those with power and the privilege to do enact positive change, the privilege to enact positive change do to further this cause?
Yeah, I guess with people with power and stuff, it goes like as simple as like, I can't, it blows my mind. Like anybody that has like over like 4,000 followers on Instagram isn't using that power to be a voice, like a black box on Instagram isn't gonna cut it. I've learned a lot from Instagram. Black people are learning too. We're learning too, like the little boxes, and you can scroll. We are urban, and like they just have like little facts and little things about the propositions or things that are going on, or days that what happened in 1940 on this day, and it's pretty similar to what's happening now and people being lynched then and that. There's like facts and things that are being posted on Instagram are like so quick and engraved in our head, and it's working. So again, if you have an outlet or a platform and you're an ally, and you can post something on your Instagram to show to your white family back at home, or just anybody, please just use that. It's super simple.
Thank you. Either of two of you have something you want to go at, something that spoke to your soul in that question?
Yeah, look, here, I think it's important for folk to understand, right, what anti-racism is. And defined, it's the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices, and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equally. I think one of the reasons why, if I were to talk to folk who I consider an ally in this work, whatever their sort of position in society might be, one of the first things that I would encourage people to do is to acknowledge the unseen colossal dimensions of race and racism. And not just to understand and be aware about it, but to recognize the ways in which power remains in the hands of the same groups, as well as the ways in which others are actively disadvantaged. To think about concentrated and accumulated disadvantage and how that sort of creates the conditions that lead to some of the poor health outcomes we've been able to see in our society, and some of the inability for folk who may be working as hard as they possibly can to earn a living, but still can't afford to pay rent. I would also encourage folk to acknowledge racial trauma. It's real, right? What people are going through, the crises that folk are dealing with in our society, the anti-Blackness, the anti-immigration sentiment in the society, those are real forms of trauma and violence that's happening upon people. And one of the things I would encourage people to do is to be courageous and be willing to confront it, because confronting racism benefits everyone, and fixing blame helps no one. So what we have to think about is how we take responsibility so that we're helping each other get through these challenges with trust, with mutual respect and understanding. But more than that, I would also encourage us to interrogate our positionality. So ask yourself, how are you interacting with your colleagues at work? How are you interacting with your peers? If you are a faculty member watching right now or an administrator, how are you interacting with students? How are the unique institutional barriers that exist in our university or in the institution you might be working in? How are those barriers and benefits bestowed upon certain people, right? How is your identity sort of interacting with your students and your colleagues? And by, I think, interrogating your position, you can take on racial hierarchies, that you can recognize when a certain group is benefiting. You can understand how the institution may be affecting people. And by doing all of that, finally develop an anti-racist agenda, one that sort of challenges our beliefs about, for example, what constitutes an ideal student who came here to UCLA or who might not be eligible to go to UCLA, but may have worked hard in the context of their environment. Interrogate your relationship between race, gender, class, right? And sexuality and figure, multiple aspects of our identity. Explore and incorporate an anti-racist sort of pedagogy in your class. If you are a student, what you could do is in your class, ask questions of your fellow faculty members. Of your fellow peers and of your faculty members to incorporate text from Black and brown writers and artists, right? Ask them, who informs what I'm learning today? You can ask that question. Where did you get these texts from? Why are these the texts that are selected? Why aren't you bringing in more texts from more diverse voices? These are actually very valid questions. Look, I'm a faculty member here at the university. I welcome my students asking me these questions and bringing in their knowledge to the space. You have a role to play in your own educational experience, and you can be an active learner in that. So these are some of the things that I want to encourage us to consider, especially in this environment, as we consider ways to take on racism and develop an anti-racist agenda.
You just out here speaking straight facts. I mean, just like taking us all this class. This is a Saturday. We were prepared. Trisden, anything that spoke to your soul in this question?
Yes, I just want to thank everybody that was on this panel. I think that y'all helped me understand more things, more ways that we can think about this and more ways that I can share with other people. So thank you. For me, I have to echo Dr. Scorza. It's that commitment to the anti-racist framework and understanding what that means, right? I think that it requires all of us, whatever positionality you want to read. I think that that's the one key component. We love to watch YouTube videos. We love to consume social media and different things like that, think can point us to the right direction. But to really learn, to really critically think, it requires us to read text that like we might not usually engage with, or that pushes our ideals or pushes our traditional thoughts, right? That makes us uncomfortable, and we have to ask why it makes us uncomfortable. And this is for my people with privilege and power. Asking why abolition or the not having police, why that makes you uncomfortable. Because I think that that's a question that we have to answer. When we try to have questions or conversations about abolition, there's clearly a barrier. There's clearly an uncomfort, and we have to kind of know why. We have to be able to interrogate that. But also knowing that the two most valuable resources that anyone really has is time and money. And people with privilege have a lot of that, time and money. So using that to dedicate and create space for people that don't have that is very, very important. And for students or people that don't have a lot of power, don't have a lot of resources, use your voice. As a student organizer with BGSA, working with the ASU, we did a lot of things that like people didn't really think was possible. I think it was the history that people had been fighting for this Black Resource Center on campus, but it was the pressure that we continue to apply and continue to apply. Nipsey said it best, like it's a marathon. You have to know that you might not get it now, but you got to believe that you'll get it someday. And I think that that's one of the most important things. So when knowing that this is a movement, no, we can't ever stop, right? We have to know where our place is and what your role is. Ask yourself that question, like, what is your role? Are you an artist? Use your art to share that message. I do podcasts. So Stream Brewing Black. That's a way that I try to educate and also merge education and entertainment, right? I think that the traditional sense of education, it turns people off. So how can I further educate people on these things that we talk about in a new way, in a new light? Are you a teacher? Again, education, like find different ways that you can educate that fits your way. In SJLI, we're working with, like my class, we're gonna do youth participatory action research. So that's called YPAR. And we're to identify issues in their community and find their voice. The whole class gets them ready to the end of the year when they have confidence in their voice and they have confidence in what they know, and that they can identify and point out the issues that affected their community and work together to create a solution, to find a solution, to work with their peers, to tap their administrators and different things like that. Use the resources that they have, the resources that are around them to effectively enact change in their community. I think that what we have to know is that there's strength in numbers. And we know that it might seem hopeless if we're by ourselves, but knowing if you have people on your team and you believe in them and you trust them, that y'all can get to the goal, get to the promised land at some point. But it's going to take everybody's effort. So I think that it's that belief. It's knowing that we're not hopeless and that there's a dream that so many of our revolutionaries and so many of the great leaders before us have kind of professed in a bunch, and that knowing that we can get there together.
Thank you, Trisden. Thank you, all of you, for your answers. They were phenomenal. I want to remind the participants in here, we have a couple minutes left. If you do have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section. If it's for a person, write their name. If it's just a general question, just send it on in. We do have one waiting. But before we get to that one, I want to ask this last question, and if your answers can be very brief. Thoughts and feelings on current social climate? Brief. I saw Tristan's face. I'm like, brief.
I don't know how to answer that brief or answer it at all yet. So it's all y'all. Y'all can take this one.
Change is coming. That's brief.
Change is coming. That is a fact.
I guess I would have to say read, learn, and vote. But not only vote and know that that is the end all be all, but voting is one thing that we have that is part of our power, but be an educated voter and also continue to press those officials. David is on city council, call them up. There's access to those people around us that are in power, and we have to always hold them accountable.
Thank you. Yes, voting is key. Be educated though when you're voting. Don't just vote for anything.
Vote for David Cunningham, I see. You know, the current climate is mixed with a lot of things, right? We're in a pandemic. We are getting ready to, square off here in this presidential election. We've been dealing with issues of racial justice. And it's feeling like the promise in our society, promise of equality is waning. But my feeling about this climate and my hope is that this is a moment that is waking people up. And I believe that ultimately it's going to lead to so much more in our society that helps us just be better people. And so it doesn't feel good. That's how I feel about it. It doesn't feel good right now. This moment doesn't feel like it's the best moment to be living in, but it's also a moment where I feel like there's a lot of hope because I see our graduates from UCLA. I see folk in our society who are fighting for change and fighting for justice. And that allows me to lay my head down at night with a clear conscience, knowing that not just I, but many of us are doing our best to make this place so much better.
Yes, thank you all for that. Okay, so to get to some of our questions from, yes, Trisden, please wear a mask for all of you out there. Let's care about other people and not just ourselves as we move forward in life. So yes, anyways, as we move to our panelists' questions from the audience. So This one's specific for David. Given that you're running for LA City Council in the next cycle, do you think it's possible to incorporate abolition politics when most elected officials are not for defunding the police, and see more incorporation, militarization of cops into communities of color and police funding as crucial to bridge this divide? That was a long question, but you got a minute and a half to answer it.
Perfect. So I've been thinking about that question a lot, and it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be an easy task because every city council member in LA or in the city of Los Angeles have received funding from the Los Angeles Police Department or unions supporting police unions supporting elected officials and political candidates. I will most likely be the only person not accepting political donations. If I'm elected, I will be the only person that will not have accepted political contributions from police unions. That's the sad truth about it. However, I plan to come back with a budget that will reallocate $500 million annually of the LAPD's budget to focus on community servicing programs like a citywide, or reallocate 60 million for a citywide housing insecure response team, which will work hand in hand with the Los Angeles County Department of Public and Mental Health to address, issues related to mental health. I will propose a budget to reallocate 40 million to employ community members, youth and adults, those who are housing insecure, and those who are housing insecure to provide community beautification. Our communities in South LA or South Central, the 9th District, Watts, they're unfavorable. And I believe that our city council have neglected our communities for a long time. So employing our communities to be able to, rebuild our communities, reallocating, basically $350 million for the redevelopment of long-term affordable housing, not just, special, real affordable housing, not just like, some units are like being allocated at, are being allocated for affordable housing, and then the rest of the units are, will be priced at market rate. And that's how they get us. And then that's how they got the Jordan Downs. And that's something that I would like to see eliminated in our city council, the corruption. And I will call out my colleagues on the city council for their, misuse of taxpayer dollars. LAPD has this excessively large budget, and, our community gets nothing. How does that work?
Yeah. Thanks, David. So for any one person that feels they can answer this, and if not, I can probably help with it. What is UCLA doing to make sure Black students feel a part of the UCLA community? Trisden, don't be looking away like that.
I'll take it on because
Okay.
I think I was actually impressed with the way the university stood up and responded in this moment, because it wasn't just rhetoric. The chancellor appointed Vicky Mays as a special advisor to begin to help not only advise him and ensure that he had direction to sort of think about the needs of Black student staff and faculty, but also increase things like graduate student fellowships, postdoctoral fellowships, added faculty lines, committing money to research grants, developing equity advisors, dedicated staff to address these issues. And look, I get it. I was a part of the African Student Union as well. But I want to acknowledge the hard work that Black Bruins have done to get the university to this place, right? Like to help push for a Black Resource Center and a Black floor in our residential halls, to make sure that the conversations on like make sure conversations around like UCPD are being had, right? I want to acknowledge the hard work that our Black students have been doing, the students in the African Student Union have done, and the Black Graduate Student Association have done, and the National Pan-Hellenic Association have done to really push the university in a direction that honors and cares for Black student, staff, and faculty. In addition to that, I want to acknowledge the history of those activists that have fought to improve admissions on UCLA's campus So that not only are Black students at critical or can get to critical mass, but that we honor their voice and acknowledge the work that Black alumni have been doing to raise money for Black students, for scholarships, to make sure that students that go to Black students that come to UCLA can afford to be here as well. So there's a lot that's happening, and sometimes it's easy to get, I think, lost in the challenges. But we gotta lift up the things that are going on while still holding the institution accountable to doing more.
Agreed. You took a lot of that out of my brain and went straight through the screen. So thank you. Our next question is more of a statement. And so if any one person feels they can help with this. Defunding the police term is very misleading. Can someone comment? Like using the phrase defunding the police.
Well,
The police aren't working. Law enforcement agencies across the board are not working for our communities. So it's essential to use the term defunding the police. Abolish ICE, abolish LAPD, abolish the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Well, I feel like I hear what you're saying. I think the question is asking if someone can explain what defunding means versus what abolition means. Trisden, I know you were about to share.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on this a little earlier, but defunding, in the sense, you can replace that with reallocation. So the money is not disappearing, that funding is being taken from the police budget that is oversized and moved into the things that have not been catered to by the city, whether that be housing inequality, economic inequality, education, different things like that.
Thank you for that. Okay, this next one, if any one person wants to answer. How could international students and people globally contribute to the Black Lives Matter movement?
I
Bri,
actually
you're
really
muted.
like that.
You can go too, Tristan, but Bri started talking, but she's muted.
Bri, you got it.
Bri, you gotta unmute.
I was just reading the question out loud, and
Okay.
you saw me moving my mouth, so I don't have an answer yet.
Okay, Tristan, you got it.
Yeah, so I just really like that question because I think that there are things happening globally that we can connect. I think that knowing that Black Lives Matter is about Black people in America in a way, and the police brutality and the injustice that we are suffering. But I think it's very important to see solidarity and make connections across the globe, so we can see what is happening to people in Palestine, how they're being brutalized there. There was just a ceasefire that just was imposed between Turkey and Armenia. The Armenians have been brutalized, and there was a lot of injustice going on there. Right now, we are seeing there's the SARS campaign in Nigeria, which is, I don't have a lot of information on it right now, but I actually was reading about it the last few days. So if somebody has come across it, I would love you to jump in. But I know that there's it's police brutality, and they've kind of just taken over their power. I think that that's one thing that we see when there is power in place and there's no accountability. Those powers are often abused, and there are people, youth specifically, being brutalized and killed. So I think that just seeing that there are connections globally, it's not just, injustice doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's more about the conditions that bring these things to be. So just knowing that we can, if we see these connections and make these connections, then that's how we can create solidarity and kind of push back as a unit.
Thank you for that. Okay, this last one's our last question of the day, and I love it. Thank you for who submitted it. And I'm going to kind of rephrase it. If each one of you can tell me one or two ways that you choose to take care of yourselves as you continue to advocate for Black lives.
Yes, Marika, that's my friend who asked that question. Go, friend. I think it's important to have these conversations and message your friends and check in with them. Mental health comes first. I'm very new to therapy. I had no idea that Black women needed therapy till literally last year. You know, we were always busy being a superhero, so I didn't know that sometimes we have just little faults that need to just be talked about, you know. Talk to resource. A lot of people are giving, allies and stuff are giving resources. I know a woman who's giving free massages to Black women and free therapy up until a certain point for Black men and Black women. I think it's important. I can give more resources too, a list that I've given. We could start with free, we can go cheap and then, you know, try there, but let's start with free. But most importantly, just, you know, check in with your friends and have these conversations, you know. Microaggression is also super manipulating on the brain, and we need to take care of that therapeutically as well. I could go off about this, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, Bri. Anyone else, 1 to 2 quick things that you do to take care of yourself while advocating for Black lives? And if you don't, you should be. Maybe all of us need Bri's list.
For the folk who are on this, who are participants in the audience who know me, I go camping. I take time with my family, with my wife and my kids, my son and my daughter. Son is 11, my daughter's 4. And we will go camping. We actually took a nice little summer trip around the country, and we went to Yellowstone, and we went kayaking in the lake, and but you know, grilling out on the in our campground. We went and saw Rushmore. We actually took some time and learned about the history of Rushmore as well, and how it was actually built by white supremacists. So that's a whole different conversation. But I think but we took some time to go spend with family, to rest. And while I still worked and still stayed involved, it was important to be okay with this idea that we don't have to be on and active all the time, that it is perfectly acceptable for those of you who are working to take a vacation, those of you who are students to be able to de-stress and find coping strategies, to exercise, to meditate. I meditate all the time. You can use Headspace as a free app. To do these things to help activate our parasympathetic nervous system, to really sort of come down from the stress and the pressure, and to not feel like the weight of the world has to be on our shoulders all the time. Because frankly, if we're not here, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not here for, you know, those that we care about in the future, then what good are we going to be in the long run, right? So we got to take care of ourselves, and we have to take care of our bodies and our minds.
Yep.
And our spirits.
Thank you guys so much. So we are at time. Thank you for the participants. Thank you for the panelists. For the participants, there's another panel at 4:15 on how to protest effectively. So please come back and join us then. Thank you so much for the panelists. You all were phenomenal. And thank you for the UCLA Volunteer Center for helping put this together. Breathe. That's what, breathe, go camping, take some time.
Thank you all.
Watch some TV.